Speaking right now, staff writer at The Atlantic in Alberta. His new piece is out this morning. It's titled "Donald Trump is on the wrong side of the religious right." And Tim, you wrote this piece with Mike Pence in mind. Explain.
Interesting.
Yeah, Joe, Mika, good morning. It's become clear, I think, to Mike Pence, perhaps some of the other Republican candidates as well, that to the extent that Trump has a real political vulnerability in this primary, it's that he has alienated, antagonized, and in some cases made real enemies out of some of the more influential activist leaders on the religious right. We're talking specifically about pro-life organizations who feel like Trump threw them under the bus after the midterm election and essentially, refused to accept any responsibility for promoting a lot of extremist candidates who lost in November and instead blamed pro-lifers for Republican defeat, Republican underperformance at the polls in November. And so what Pence has attempted to do here is sort of drive a wedge between Trump and some of those pro-life organizations and their leadership. And Pence, of course, knows these people for decades. This is sort of the water he swam in for many years. And what's interesting is that I've talked to dozens of these people now in recent weeks, and all of them agree that Trump has a serious vulnerability here. They're just not terribly interested in Pence being the one to exploit it. They're sort of waiting for a Ron DeSantis to come along, maybe even a Mike Pompeo. They're kind of watching Tim Scott out of the corner of their eyes. So there's a really interesting subplot here to the 24 primary, but we haven't necessarily seen who's going to try to step in and make a real play for those voters. The only person attempting it so far, Mike Pence, is not gaining much traction, at least in this early stage.
Tim, one of the things that occurs to me looking at your article is that Donald Trump did renege, or at least not show up in some cases, renege in others, on supporting a lot of the religious rights candidates in the midterms around the abortion question and other things. And they are not happy with their candidate out there being accused of doing something with a porn star. But there's never been an alternative to him to emerge. And his arrogance, I get from some of them that we talk in ecumenical terms, even though we don't agree on much, is that he acts like he created the movement rather than the movement supporting him. Talk about how you deal with the fact that there are leaders of the Christian right and ministers that, between you and I, have big egos that don't want to feel like they could be taken for granted. And when he didn't deliver for them, they take a step back from that.
Yeah, that's well said, and that's exactly right. I think we've all gotten a little carried away to a certain extent with the well-known statistic now that 81% of white evangelicals supported Trump in 2016 in the general election. What that statistic ignores is the fact that earlier on in the primary campaign, really there were only a couple of prominent evangelicals supporting Trump. Almost everyone else was supporting either Ted Cruz, Marco Rubio, or Jeb Bush. There were a couple even supporting John Kasich. But as far as the sort of organized movement evangelical leadership goes, you're exactly right. Most of these folks were not aligned with Trump. Many of them were outspoken against Donald Trump. It was only once he became the nominee and he convened 500 or 600 of these folks in New York City at the Marriott Marquis and had Mike Huckabee and Ben Carson and Franklin Graham and some others come up and vouch for him. That was really, and then he put out the Supreme Court list. He chose Mike Pence as his running mate. Those are the things that sort of rallied the evangelical movement around Trump. But he has, in recent years, you're right, Reverend, he has acted as though he sort of, created this modern evangelical political movement. And what you've seen here in recent months, very quietly, but tangibly, is you've seen a number of people, including some of the members of Trump's Evangelical Advisory Board, people who were with him throughout all 4 years in office, talking to him regularly. They have stepped back from him now, and they've made clear that they're not going to support him in this primary. And they're basically begging for somebody else to come and take that support. The problem is nobody has really made a play for it yet. Particularly, they're all waiting for DeSantis, and DeSantis has basically kept them all at arm's length, which is sort of an interesting window into his political strategy, if you will.
Yeah. There's so many things that I'd love to talk about, David French here. But first, we'll talk about, too, with you regarding what Tim's brought up. First, let's talk about the pro-life situation. Here's a guy who is as pro-choice as I got. Spent his entire adult life being pro-choice. He decides to run in his late 60s, and suddenly he's pro-life. And yet, he let everybody know that he thought it was stupid for Roe to be overturned. There were all these leaks coming from Trump that he didn't want Roe to be overturned, that it would be a political disaster. And then you had Donald Trump blaming the pro-life movement for the losses in 2022, not coming out to vote. And so I mean, this guy, you have the guy who's been pro-choice his entire life, and then suddenly becomes pro-life. He freaks out about Roe being overturned. He leaks it and lets everybody know that he thinks this will be a political disaster. And then he blames the pro-life crowd for losing 2022. This is a champion of the pro-life movement?
Well, you know, especially when he has an opening with DeSantis right now, he could say, look, I'm the president who appointed the justices who were the majority of the justices who overturned Roe. And DeSantis's Florida is behind every other major state in the South on its abortion laws, that it is Donald Trump who's the true pro-life candidate. And there would be a lot of rank and file evangelicals, although I think Tim is nailing it with sort of the evangelical leader class that never really loved him so much, but wanted to be in the room where it happened once he was, you know, the nominee and going to be in the Oval Office. But with the evangelical rank and file, that's a message that would really, really resonate with them. And he's just not taking it. But, you know, I think he's in the school of thought now where he's been for a long time that says, my base is bigger than the base of any Republican politician. They are with me. They're completely with me, but not actually unconditionally. But his base is not the core of the pro-life movement. His base is much more the reactionary populist side of the GOP. And that core of his following has never been as fully a pro-life as the rest of sort of the larger evangelical movement, the Republican Party.
Yeah. And finally, David, I wanted to ask you, don't really want to bring it up, but I'm going to bring it up because I don't understand it. You know, I never confused the Falwells for the Grahams. I never confused Jerry Jr. for again, the Graham family. People, I always tell people like Billy Graham, well, he was like our Pope. I mean, he was, it's hard to really put into words how much Billy Graham meant to my family growing up. And that's why it hurts when I see Franklin Graham still out there running resistance for this autocrat in waiting, this horrible, horrible human being who literally celebrates rioters. And, you know, Franklin Graham, he's the inheritor of an extraordinary legacy. He's got Samaritan's Purse. If you look Franklin Graham's name up on Google right now, I guarantee you the first thing that will pop up will be an emergency response to the tornadoes in Mississippi. I guess what I'm saying is with his legacy and with the good deeds that his organizations are doing, why does he need to continue defending this horrible, horrible man who is the antithesis of everything his father was?
Yeah, Joe, that is a mystery to me. As you were saying, I guarantee you right now some of the absolute first people, in addition to the first responders in Mississippi, are the Samaritan's Purse disaster relief teams. Guarantee you they're mobilizing right now, doing incredible work in the United States. And that's Franklin Graham's Samaritan's Purse. So that's on the one hand. And then on the other hand, I put him in a different category from a lot of the other evangelical leaders who I think really held their nose to support Donald Trump. At one point, Franklin Graham may have done it, but from the tone and the tenor of his comments, even post January 6th, it seems as if Franklin Graham is supporting Donald Trump out of real conviction. Like, this is not a guy who's just holding his nose to support Donald Trump. He seems to be deeply connected to him to such an extent as he's even, backtracked on some of his criticism of the Clintons from the 90s to to double down on supporting Donald Trump. And frankly, Joe, it's an absolute mystery to me. I see the I need to be in the room where it happened sort of mindset. I can actually understand that in a way better than I can understand a person, an evangelical, out of sincere, knowing what we know about Donald Trump's conduct. And I'm not talking about folks who don't know everything, but knowing what we know and with other options, particularly in the primary, out of sincere conviction saying Donald Trump is the guy, that, Joe, is a mystery to me.
Well, and you know, I can see, I don't understand it. I think it's horrific that these pastors who are hacks, who will do anything to be in that room, you know, that's one thing. But if you're a Graham, you're in your own room.
You don't need Trump. Yeah.
You don't need Donald. No, you've got a legacy, well, that he's not helping. But, you know, there's Ann, of course, who's been extraordinary, been on our show a good bit. They've got this ministry that will survive Donald Trump. So why? Tim, do you have any answers on this? I know we got to go, but I don't want to personalize this too much. It just hurts when I see the name Graham attached to the endorsement of a guy who tried to overthrow an election and inspired so much violence and is still praising violence with a choir of convicts who beat up cops.
Joe, the best I can do in answering that question is that I think we've got an idolatry problem for a lot of Christian believers in this country who have come to, in many cases, prioritize and even worship this country over the kingdom in which their citizenship ultimately belongs. And that's a problem for a lot of Christians, and it's heartbreaking for a lot of Christians who are watching it from the outside as you're describing it.
I can tell you that it's said beautifully.
Yeah.
I don't understand. I just don't understand how people who grew up, and if you're a believer like we are, grew up hearing the greatest story ever told, and believing it. I know there are a lot of people watching who don't believe it. That's totally fine. But believing in the power of the Word and the power of God and understanding that we're all flawed and we're all failed, and I certainly am at the top of that list, but people that would trade that in and prioritize a failed game show host with all the things he does every day. You talk about throwing pearls at swine. I mean, Tim's exactly right. There's an idolatry problem here that I just don't get. People literally say that Donald Trump, I saw a clip on Fox where they were going around and people were like comparing Donald Trump to Jesus Christ. Oh, this is so blasphemous. It is.
It's a cult. It's a cult.
You just read a few of the red words.
Yeah.